Hey TypeScript engineers. Today we're going to dive into our second of 3 videos on deployment. And this is a very exciting video because we're going to talk about how to deploy Next.js web apps to Firebase using Symmetric. The cool thing about this video is that at the end, you'll know how to deploy any type of web app that you want, and it can be mobile responsive, dark mode responsive, all that jazz. So the first thing to do is to actually create your TypeScript monorepo on Symmetric. Just head it over to Symmetric3d.com, fill out a couple prompts, and your TypeScript monorepo will be good to go. One of the types of packages you'll get is actual workspace packages for Next.js. And once you have that, all you have to do is spin up a Firebase project, and you can deploy these using Firebase Hosting. It's a very fast, globally scaled hosting platform that can host static HTML sites. And as engineers, we're always thinking about speed. So you want to configure the deployment to happen automatically using CI/CD. And the easiest way to do that is with GitHub Actions, because it'll listen to commits to your trunk branch. Every time it sees it, it can deploy to production. So what are the benefits of static sites? The most important benefit is that it's really fast. Users who play around with your site will get a really fast user experience. Also, because it's static, it's very easy for search engines to index your pages, and that can help you get some more organic traffic. A third benefit is it's really cost effective. Symmetric has a really nice free tier, and Firebase Hosting, you can even use it without having the Blaze plan. And lastly, it's easy for engineers. It's as simple as a couple clicks, run it locally, and then ship it. So let's actually dive into this and see how it all works. Okay, cool. So as always, we're going to start with some real world examples, take out all the theory, and actually see what this looks like. So what you're seeing here is Symmetric.blog. It's one of our 6 web applications that's actually built using this technique of static sites with Next.js. So you can play around with it. As you see, you've got a nice user interface. It's mobile responsive. We've got some nice dark mode as well. And when you deploy this, we actually also use Firebase. And as you can see inside of this hosting site, which has the ID blog Symmetric production, each version that's deployed over this GitHub action has a tag. And if you ever want to roll back, it's very easy to do. And this is what the actual GitHub action workflow run looks like. So there are lots of steps. You can take a look at the workflow file. It's pretty straightforward. It just builds the Docker container. It runs the command to actually build the specific web app that we're aiming to deploy. And then it actually deploys it to production. If the use case comes up, there are also ways to configure this so that you can get preview versions of your web app. And the typical way you see that is using some separate Git branches, and each feature branch can have its own preview URL. And all that is really easy to see from the Firebase console as well. Cool. So this is what the web app looks like when it's running locally. So when you create a monorepo on Symmetric, the thinking is that you'll have some work that you want to do locally to preview your project. And then when you deploy it, you want it to be an exact mimic of that. So notice how we're at localhost 6057. It's almost indistinguishable from the actual production deployment at Symmetric.blog. We have a little bit of differences in terms of the environment variables. So you can create, all types of environments that you want in mimic production. You also don't want to be in the business of touching production data. But the actual user experience is very similar. Okay, cool. So if you take a look at the code base here, we've got a couple things to emphasize. So at a high level, remember Symmetric is all about TypeScript monorepos. So we've got the JavaScript SDK, the React SDK. We've got lots of different web apps in here. And then we've also got Express REST APIs. So when you think about working on and deploying Next.js web apps, that's going to be similar to working on any of these projects. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure TypeScript is configured properly. You want to turn on your TypeScript compiler in watch mode, which we've already done. It's the command tsc-watch. And then you want to actually start running this Next.js web app in dev mode, which is as simple as running next dev and then passing the port. So that's how we've gotten to this step, which is working on the web app locally. It's actually very similar to working on it from a GitHub code space, which we're going to talk about in a future video. But it suffices to say, now we're ready to start actually working on features. Cool. So what we have in this VS Code workspace right now are a few files that I want to actually talk through. There's lots of really good documentation on this There's some good documentation on how this all works in the Symmetric docs app. So you can head over to the Next.js web app section and you can see how all this works. There are some examples in here. We'll talk about how features actually work. We'll talk about Firebase configuration, all that jazz. But I want to emphasize that when you set up these web apps within your TypeScript monorepo, especially in the case of the web apps, you want to make sure that each has the correct Firebase configuration. So in the Firebase RC file, you want to set up the Firebase project ID. And then in the Firebase.json file, you want to make sure to pass the site ID. So this is important because you're going to have lots of sites. And as your project scales, you may have dozens. And Firebase makes this straightforward. It just assumes that each time you've configured the correct site ID. And next, I also want to emphasize this public folder. So notice how the public folder points to out, because this is the directory that Next.js emits when you run the next export command. Cool. And so now if we take a look at the actual workflow, we can see how all this works. So there's a really nice workflow extension in the GitHub Marketplace, Firebase Extended Action Hosting Deploy. And that's what you'll get when you create a monorepo with Symmetric. It'll automatically set all this up for you so that you just have to pass in the entry point and then pass in the actual channel ID, all that jazz. Cool. So with that, we can also see a couple important topics, but one of them that I want to quickly emphasize is the importance of the transpile packages field in your next config file. And if you're working on a Next.js web app that's not in a monorepo, a lot of times this field isn't very, very important. But in a monorepo, it's critical because you want to make sure to include this field, and each time that you add a new JavaScript SDK or React SDK, just make sure to append it to this array, because this is how Next.js is going to actually give your files and all of your custom React in the source folder access to those packages. Cool. So there's a lot of really cool things for you to explore, but it suffices to say that deploying to Firebase Hosting with Symmetric is really simple. And you can also get the full power of Next.js no matter how many different types of sites that you want to build. So Symmetric has 6 at the time of this video, but we're adding new web apps every week. And you can also get that same benefit when you want to create actual functional products too. So when you want to create, SSO apps, or when you want to create dashboards for your users, it's all built on the same concept of Next.js static sites, and you can very easily host them within your TypeScript monorepo. So we highly recommend this pattern, and it's something that you may have trouble with initially, but that's why we're here to help. So thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or hop over to our Discord server. All right, peace.